I am Ben Kitili at the KTN News Center. Very good morning to you this Sunday, the 10th day of June 2018. We're glad you could join us. This is Sunday Edition, Kenya's premier Sunday morning political show. For the next 120 minutes, as always, we shall be trying to dissect and analyze some of the biggest political and governance stories in the Republic. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk about a lot. We'll talk about the war on graft, the latest, the 43 suspects in the National Youth Service scandal were denied bail this past week. 2 of them have moved to court to challenge that decision, claiming they are unwell. That has continued to elicit a lot of reactions from Kenyans, some of them saying that the courts are abusing the suspects' rights. Is that the case? The panel will be giving us their thoughts on that. We'll also be taking a look at more happenings in the courts. The Court of Appeal did nullify the election of Machakos Governor Dr. Alfred Mutua. Celebrations for Vinyan Ndeti. The court, ordering the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, to conduct a fresh election in accordance with the laws. So the people of Machakos are going back to the drawing board, or are they? The governor has said he will move to the Supreme Court to challenge that decision. Remember, the High Court had upheld his election earlier this year in February. We'll also talk about new appointments to parastatal boards by the President, Uhuru Kenyatta. It seemed to be a poll loser's paradise this past week. A lot of politicians being rewarded in those appointments. My guests are here with me. I have with me Kipchumba Karori, lawyer and political strategist. I have with me communication experts and political commentators, Esbon Owila and Mark Bichach, as well as political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good to see you. We shall be getting into the thick of things very shortly. Let's start with a look at the newspaper headlines this morning. All right, so let's begin with the Sunday Standard. Excuse me. And gentlemen, just even before the dust can settle on the 9 billion shillings that could have been lost in the National Youth Service scandal, and then the National Cereals and Produce Board, more than 1 billion. Now, the Standard is reporting that there is a revelation report of fresh 6 billion scam in another key government agency under the Ministry of Energy that has seen taxpayers lose billions of shillings through fictitious claims, price escalations and payments for work not done. Same issues, different ministry. Dismas, what are your initial reactions to this?
We're seated on dangerous grounds. The Auditor General says we lose up to a third of our budget every year. So depending on which books you're looking at, it could be 500 billion or it could be 600 billion.
Right.
And for the longest time possible, Kenyans have not taken those opinions with the interest that they ought to be given. But right now, the media is actually breaking it down, telling us when the Auditor General speaks about 500 billion, this is exactly what it means. And it's not surprising that we're having these scams coming out every single day. And one hopes that the journalists who are doing these investigative pieces will actually do them in a hurry so that we are over and done with this. Because you see, when they keep on coming in drips every single day, then they can make Kenyan get a disillusion. So maybe we need to see them coming up in a hurry. And then we, as a nation, we decide what are we going to do. Are we going to embrace corruption as a best practice so that it becomes a national institution, so that we start celebrating people who steal from the public coffer? Or are we going to engage in ceremonial actions? Like, for instance, a few days ago, a number of people were arrested, and there's a genuine fear that probably the investigations were not very solid, so the prosecutions may not be solid as well, and these guys would walk home. On the same note, we understand one of the suspects is spending quality time at the Kenyatta National Hospital. And again, from media reports, the media reports seem to suggest that, in fact, the suspect has no medical condition. Because according to a source which we are told is reliable, her heart beats like the heart of a kid. So really, she doesn't have any issues.
All right.
So at the end of the day,
we'll get into Lilian Omolo's surgeon at the Kenyatta National Hospital private wing. But just looking at these numbers, gentlemen, 81.9 million, that being price escalation beyond the limit set by the Public Procurement Authority, 944 million suspicious and inflated repairs of cables, 6.3 billion being the total of that. Mark, is this just another well-planned theft? What's happening in this country?
You know, the more you study the corruption in this country, you begin to realize that corruption is planned for right down from the budgeting process. If there's an audit to be done, then we need to audit the budgeting process, because that is where the corrupt cartels begin their work in earnest. And therefore, you can tell from this particular scandal that there's a lot of issues to do with the system with which Kenyans operate. Let's start here. Cables are not repaired. You replace them. There's no way. What are you going to do with them? You replace them. And therefore, when you have fictitious cable replacements, then that is suspicious. Secondly, you have to go to the other layer of inflated land rates, which is another form of corruption, which the public participates willingly in. Because what we are told is members of the Ketraco fraternity go and tell locals, sell us this land because we know that the cable is going to pass through this particular place. And if it passes there, then it is the Ketraco staff themselves who are involved in the process of inflating the rate of buying this land. This is corruption to the grassroots. We've devolved it down to the parcel of land that we sell. And this is the kind of corruption that forces the president to do systemic changes. This is why you've got to look at your entire procurement procedure. This is why you've got to look at every procurement manager. This is why you've got to look at IFMIS and find out what are the loopholes in IFMIS and how does it work. This is why we need to streamline how we pay people, because the argument always is that because the government takes 2-3 years to pay me for this pencil, I shall sell it at 100 shillings instead of 10 shillings to cover myself. So these are the things that we need to fix. And we need to copy from India, which uses IFMIS just the same as Kenya. But the difference is that a pen in the Ministry of Labor is the same cost as a pen in the Ministry of Defense in India. In Kenya, a towel can range in prices from 1,000 shillings to 100,000 shillings in the same IFMIS system, right, which reeks of the abuse that we've meted upon the system that the civil servants are supposed to hold in trust. Right. For the Kenyan public.
So Hesbon, we are hearing all these things, land, fictitious land, or inflated land compensation deals, fictitious deals, price escalations, payment for goods and services not delivered. Are these things totally impossible to cure by heads rolling at the top, because they're happening just in the middle and the small people in those ministries?
Well, I think the most difficult aspect of the question you're asking is who are the people responsible? Because it's easy to point out, that if this is escalation of the prices of land and people have been compensated beyond the amount they ought to have been given, then there must be somebody who has executed that. There must be somebody who authorized. And therefore, you can easily trace these people. And the fact that it's difficult to deal with these people means that probably there is a trickle-down effect from the top, that there are people at the top who are essentially influencing some of these things. But you look at the concerted effort that we've had from the government, from the media, and even the outcry from the public, it seems like, time is up for most of these guys, that the spotlight has been on. A number of people kept saying that, the same old media, they'll do this for 2 days, we'll forget. But I think the agenda that is being set and the corruption frames that are predominant in the public domain right now means that, if President Kenyatta was serious about this, then he will continue with it. If he was not serious, there's a sense in which the public will put him on the spotlight and the government, and we'll have to see a few heads roll. You look at things like a price escalation beyond the limit set by the law. I mean, the law is very clear that you cannot do a variation beyond a certain threshold. And therefore, if the Auditor General is telling us that there were escalations, it's just a question of looking at the procurement processes.
Right.
Who escalated? Who are the people responsible? And hold them responsible. And the beauty of this is that it is increasingly becoming clear that the people who are held responsible are showing signs, you know, of disclosing the powers behind what they've been doing.
All right. Kipchumba, what do you read from this? And is it a possibility that in every single government ministry there is corruption of such magnitude? Because every day we hear fresh reports in a new government department, billions of shillings lost.
I think, Ben, the question should not be in every ministry. The question should be, where don't we have corruption? If we widen the gap, the bracket so much, we might lose the mark. But if we now go for that might not exist, we might get there. But the point which we need to make and appreciate is that the media at least is doing its work. We can now see the media going and giving us reports as to when the Auditor General says there is corruption, the media is backing it up with numbers. But what we must not lose is this. I think we have talked of corruption so much that we need to just have a newspaper in this country dedicated to telling us who is not, the corruption cases for the week and everything. But going forward, there have been a lot of energies being put and synergy between the different institutions that are supposed to fight corruption. What we need to get now is we need to get to make strict regulations in budgeting. You cannot tell me if today Ketraco lost 6.3 billion, 6 billion in terms of corruption. You cannot allocate the same Ketraco, the same amount as the last budget. Ask them, why are you giving them this much when they are paying a software company a certain amount of money, they are paying somebody, the prices of land are being escalated 7 times. Do we get value for our money? I think no. So the question should be, what does our parliament do? What does the oversight, the PAC and the PIC, what are they doing? They should be able to recommend budget cuts for these departments. The other point is this, I think also we are fighting corruption in a vigilante way. We are doing it haphazardly so that at times we are losing track. Today we are talking about Ketraco, tomorrow nobody will be thinking about what happened with NYS. The other thing is this, with the way corruption scandals are emerging, they are emerging in a systemic manner, which begs the question, do we have political voice behind the scandals? So as a strategist, I'll ask myself, do we have people sitting somewhere and whistleblowing these scandals in a certain manner, trying to determine or to shape the course of a political...
Right. That's a good question, and we'll talk about the role of Parliament and their capability to oversight or to call out corruption or to fight corruption. But the story on the Sunday Nation, the splash, Ruto allies cry foul and Uhuru war on graft. That is exactly what you're talking about, Kipchumba. So a story by Onjoy Githai and Justice Wanga. Silent but vicious wars erupted in Jubilee following President Uhuru Kenyatta's purge on graft, with allies of his deputy William Ruto feeling they are unfairly being targeted. MPs are mostly drawn from the DP's Rift Valley backyard. They are saying that the crackdown on corruption is following a certain pattern aimed at ultimately derailing Deputy President William Ruto's presidential ambitions. Is there anything in this, Dismas?
That's a loaded question, which requires very careful and structured answers. But the first thing when you're talking about corruption in Kenya, maybe instead of us crying about corruption every single day, we should try and give solutions. And in my view, every ministry or parastatal, they should have a zero-based budgeting. That at the beginning of every financial year, the accounting officer or the authorized officer or the person running the show has to go back to the drawing table and justify a budget. But we know what we have in Kenya. If your budget is 1 billion this year, the next financial period, it goes to 2 billion. And you know, as a result, the accounting officer doesn't even know what to use with that resource. So I think we should go back to zero-based budgeting, that the accounting officer has to sit with departmental heads and agree that this is the money we are looking for so that we go compete for resources. Then number 2, and this is a response to what Abichacha has indicated, that you know, procurement officers and accounting heads need to go home. What he forgets to tell Kenyans is that in every single ministry, there is a ministerial tender board or committee, and that's the one which awards all these tenders or contracts, whatever it is. And it works under the close supervision of the principal secretary, who is the accounting officer. So the buck, in fact, stops with the accounting officer. That's why you are the accounting officer. When you're appointed at PS, the Treasury gives you special powers to spend money on its behalf. So you're the accounting officer. If a coin gets lost, you're supposed to be held responsible. In fact, all this corruption taking place in Kenya, the person who is supposed to be held responsible is the CS for Treasury, Rotish, because all these public servants are actually employees of the Ministry of Treasury who've been seconded to those ministries. But now going to the question that you've asked about, that maybe this corruption seems to be targeting folks or friends associated with the Deputy President Ruto.
Do you think there's mischief in this fight on graft?
Well, there could be mischief, but it's very early in the day to come to that conclusion because there's no really serious pattern. Because if you look at the NYS, the suspects, the names seem to come from one particular ethnic group. When you go to the National Cereals and Produce Board, when you go through the names, they seem to come from one particular ethnic group. So one wouldn't say that there's a deliberate strategy. But if our in the DP's kitchen cabinet, or if I was his friend or ally, I would be very delighted, because if I've not stolen anybody's car, why should I be afraid? You know, there's a saying we're told in grammar school, that the guilty are always running. The guilty are always afraid. Why would you be afraid? In fact, if anybody within the DP's camp suspects there being, somebody is zooming into them for errors of either commission or omission, they should come in the public domain. They say, there's a political mischief. You guys want to stop our candidates from becoming president in 2022. We now want to subject ourselves to a lifestyle audit so that we convince all Kenyans that, in fact, we have not stolen anybody's coin.
All right.
But if they keep on running with this kind of headlines you're seeing in the nation today, then people will start confirming their worst fears, that, in fact, wherever they smoke, there could be a fire.
Mark, Ruto Wala is saying there's a witch hunt going on here. Are they trivializing the issue of corruption?
I think that strategy is ill-advised. As Dismas has said, the guilty run where no one gives chase. And
it's like saying you're just targeting the thieves on our side. You're not targeting...
and not the thieves on your side, which is inherently an admission of guilt, which is a very dangerous strategy, because when you say you are targeting corruption on our side, or we are targeted in this fight of corruption, it's very dangerous speak for people to use. And I think the fight of corruption in this country needs to move from the tribal basis, from the crony basis and things like that, so that now if corruption happens in Luhya land, then the Luhyas on this table should say now Luhyas are being targeted. Did the whole community go to Ketrako, and do we all have pieces of land along that line? Do I own a transformer in Ketrako, you understand, as a Luhya? And does every Kalenjin, therefore, then have a section of the cereals and produce board? We need to move into the 20th century and discover that this corruption has nothing to do with the community, and that's the problem. So you cannot be targeting Uhuru's allies or Ruto's allies or Raila's allies. The only people you can target is the corrupt, because if you go fishing in a pond, only animals that live in a pond will be caught. So how are you saying that the pond is being victimized? It cannot be. If you are a fish, you live in water. When the fisherman fishes, you're not being victimized. It is the process that happens. So if you are corrupt and you come from DP Ruto's backyard, stop defending yourself using the DP's name. As the president said, please humbly carry your own cross, go to your own jail cell, which I am sure you will not share with the DP or with the chief of your village. So the reality is this kind of lingo is what has fought the fight against corruption for too long. We need to get it to the point where whether it's a Kipchumba, it's a Bichachi, it's a Nowila, it's a Dismas, they carry the cross by themselves. Stop bringing the tribe and your leaders into your own corruption. And after all, when they're eating this money, which of us is with them in Serena or Intercon? Ben, have you ever seen a Kamba leader inviting you to have lunch and say, sisi kama wakamba tumeiba, njoo ukule kidogo? Have you ever had such a privilege?
No. Husband, what is your take on this?
Well, I want to agree with your sentiments that corruption is an individual affair, that you choose to be corrupt or not, irrespective of what the system wants. But it's also important to note that there are individuals outside there who probably like making use of the association that they have with big political names to advance their own, ill agenda, and sometimes it might be corruption. And probably these are the people who are complaining, because I think their time is up, and it's way easier to use the DP's name to shield yourself and, of course, unleash the tribal card. But I think as we fight against corruption, we also need to be alive to the fact that corruption has a very long political tradition, that there's a way in which politics and corruption have had a symbiotic relationship. Even in the 1992 first multi-party general elections in Kenya, we remember the Golden Bag issue and Patni showing up at Ajip House and saying that I will fund your campaign, and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was looking for money. And he actually touched on almost all politicians. And when we were looking at the Golden Bag's proceedings, it was a bit clear that there was a relationship between Patni, Golden Bag, and the 1992 general election. And that in itself should make all the other concerted efforts that are geared towards fighting corruption be above board, so much so that it is not a question of you're targeting somebody. You're targeting somebody who is alleged to be corrupt. And if we continue in that direction where it is corruption you're looking for, I don't think there will be anyone who will be hiding behind the political class or politician. And I think this is why I've said enough times that we need to be very careful about the fight so that we don't trivialize it. We don't make it become something that is vigilante, the way Karori is talking about it, that we should just root everything within the due process of the law, so that any prosecuted case is a clear case of an alleged corruption targeting an individual that has nothing to do with politics or tribe.
Is politicizing corruption or putting corruption into politics, whichever way you look at it, what does it point to in your opinion?
If you want to know that corruption is winning, anytime you hear we have politicized it, know that that corruption has already won, or the corrupt have won. It is I think Kenyans do not learn from history. Every time and any time a politician wants to walk out of responsibility or taking political responsibility, all you need to see is to just go to your nearby village market, invoke the name that, oh, my people are being targeted, and there you are. But going forward, is it sustainable? I think no. Everybody wants to fight corruption. That is what everybody wants to do. But the problem comes in when we politicize corruption. It is the starting point of all the problems. And when you look at how all the whistleblowing has happened, there is a lot of things that it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think it is from that space that the people at the DP's camp are uncomfortable. But be it as it may, we should not at any point have Uhuru Kenyatta's corruption or William Ruto's corruption. Anybody who's corrupt should be subjected to the same process. Because if it is 1 shilling or 10 shillings or 100 million lost, it is Kenyan taxpayers' money. It is the same way as balkanizing corrupt people into small fish and big fish. We do not have, so long as it is a fish and you have eaten our money, you belong to jail. You do not belong to a community. Communities have been used as shelter and all manner of things. We cannot just use the community as a canopy whereby Ben Kitili steals, he runs into Kitui, he declares some sort of thing, and you tell us things. I think we need to go past the nonsense. And the other thing, the institutions, given the mandate, should not entertain, because yesterday there was a letter in the media all over, social media, saying that a letter coming from the CEO of EACC going to Kinywa's office. That is not how we fight graft. Let us fight graft within the set rules.
All right, we've spent the first half hour talking about one thing only, and that is corruption. That is the two headlines and the two biggest newspapers. But very quickly, there's a story here on page 25 of the Sunday Nation. Vicious, quiet jostling for Kinywa's big seat. That is, of course, the head of the public service. He has been rumored to be nearing his exit from that position after having served ever since Jubilee ascended to power in 2013. Several names are touted to be vying for that job. There's the State House Chief of Staff, Nzioka Waita, the Controller of State House, Kinuthia Mbogwa, Kenya's deputy, Wanyama Musiambo, of course, he's been recently appointed into that position. The PS, Principal Secretary, Energy, Joseph Njoroge, his counterpart in Interior, Karanja Kibicho, and former CS, Davis Chirchir, have also been touted to be candidates for that very powerful position, somebody who enjoys the president's ear. Very quickly, Dismas, what is your prediction?
Well, in my view, the person that President Kenyatta must appoint as the head of the public service is one person who understands the public service like the back of his hand. Somebody, when given that position, he will hit the ground running. Somebody who is at home with Article, rather Chapter 6 of our Constitution and Article 10, who respects the rule of law and order, and more important, who is not associated with corruption. Because it's the case right now, there are a number of top public servants do not treat their colleagues with a lot of respect, especially if they consider you to be an outsider. This is a very sensitive position that when you're given that position, you will not be given 1 year for you to understand what is taking place in that ministry.
All right.
You should be able to hit the ground running. And you need a strong personality. And the personality I'm talking about here, if I need to give an example, is somebody like Simon Nyachai, a no-nonsense guy who has got the capacity to look at the president and in his eye and tell him, Mr. President, you are wrong on this.
All right.
This is unacceptable.
Mark, Joseph Kenya was first appointed a PS by retired President Daniel Arap Moi a long time ago, in the twilight of the Kanu administration. Who do you think is the perfect replacement?
The truth of the matter is this. The reason why Kenya has had a stellar career is because he's been a career civil servant. Appointing someone who's not familiar with the civil service into that position would be detrimental. Let's be very clear that you need to have a way of using a civil servant who understands how ministries work. You need a civil servant, in my opinion, who's either worked in the Ministry of Planning, so he understands every ministry, either Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Interior.
Time is not on our side. These gentlemen have refused to predict at all. Do you give a name?
Well, I wouldn't want to give a name, but I would just say that we need a man of integrity, a man who has been part of the system, who would serve with distinction the way Kenya has served.
Why is everybody playing safe? Kim Chomba?
For me, I would say we need somebody, one, who understands the president.
All right.
We can say you are a career civil servant, but everything, but you can never put a round bolt in a square hole. It is just pure English. Secondly, we need somebody who has maybe longevity and the usefulness to this nation in terms of being in public service. Look at it this way. We had the NYS scandal the other day. You saw how Linda Omolo's career has been in the private sector. She comes into the public sector, few months and everything tumbles. Why? Because she was not used to how things are done.
We'll wait to see how that plays out. Recently, when Joseph Kenya had traveled abroad, his duties had to be done by 3 people: his deputy, the State House Controller, as well as the State House Chief of Staff. It's a story we'll keep an eye on for you. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Sunday edition on KTN News. When we return, we talk some more on this issue of corruption, the war on corruption. We'll tell you the latest. We'll recap what happened this week. Of course, the 43 suspects in the NYS scandal being denied bail, some of them moving to court. We'll talk about all that and more when we return.